So, 2018 is over. We're a few months into 2019, which means we have a whole entire year of movies to talk about. Now, with the Oscar season just passing, I thought I might go ahead and talk about some movies that I thought merited some praise for this year. But with all that said, I thought I'd get dressed up for the occasion a little bit. I wore my special sweatpants, so you guys should feel pretty lucky to be here today. All 10 of you. Also, if you're wondering why this video was released pretty late, the answer is pretty simple. There's only so many hours in a day and only so many days in a year, and there's a lot of movies released every year. So I wanted to give the chance to documentaries, foreign films, and smaller indie pictures and stretch my window of opportunity out a little wider so I could take the time to see as many films as I could to make this list as tight and concise as possible. That being said, there are still several movies that I did not see that I wanted to see, so what can you do, you know? There's also a lot of movies I saw that I really did like. There's only so many I can talk about. Now that we have all the ground rules laid out, we'll go ahead and get into what I thought to be the best films of 2018. Here we go. The first film on this list is Lynn Ramsey's You Were Never Really Here. So I saw this movie pretty early into the year. I can't remember exactly when it came out, but I pretty much saw it the week it released because Lynn Ramsey is a director I don't think has really gotten the spotlight she deserves. She's done a lot of good movies. We Need to Talk About Kevin, Morven Caller, and Ratcatcher are all some really great films that she's done. And this one, I think, stacks pretty high on her list of movies she's made. It has a great standout performance from Joaquin Phoenix, and it's a very slow-burning psychological film with some pretty cool action in there. Now, this movie delves into the mind of a disturbed war veteran who's tasked with finding and rescuing girls who have been abducted and put into human trafficking. It's a very dark film, but it handles its subject material really well, and so at the end of the day, you get a really profound film. Now there's some great, like I mentioned before, there's some great set pieces in this movie, one of which that I really liked. I won't spoil it and get into the specifics, but it utilizes security cameras, and I've never seen anything quite like that done in a movie, at least not to that extent, and it works really well. So if you want to see a beautifully shot movie with a pretty powerful message, I would highly recommend You Were Never Really Here. Speaking of slow burn psychological movies, the next film on this list is Panos Cosmatos' film Mandy. Man, what a experience this movie is. You know how people will sometimes say it's not quite so much a movie as it is an experience, which I know sounds really pretentious, but sometimes it's true. And in Mandy's case, it is very true. Mandy is part psychological drama, part horror, part action, and it's a very dreamlike movie. It stars Nicolas Cage in what I think to be one of his best roles. Sometimes he'll have you laughing, and sometimes he'll just have a really dramatic scene that just kind of pulls you in and makes you realize that when put to the right role, he can be a very good actor. I think the visuals in this movie are something that stand out the most about it. You're kind of entranced the whole time while you're watching it, and it focuses on a pretty interesting subject matter, which is Nicolas Cage and his wife Mandy. They are wronged by a cult group. And so that sends Nicolas Cage out on a mission to get revenge and seek justice for his wife Mandy. I will say though, I think this movie has a little bit of a pacing issue. There's a scene about towards the middle that I think goes on a little bit too long, and eventually it picks up the pace and pulls you back in again. But for a while I was wondering where the movie was going. But all in all, this is a very enjoyable film. There's nothing else quite like it, and while I don't think I'll rush to see it again anytime soon for various reasons, I will say that the first time I saw it was an experience like no other. Up next is the good version of Unfriended. Searching is a very, very well done movie, and it utilizes the gimmick of shooting your entire movie using the internet and telling your story through the internet. I don't know if it's a trend yet. I don't know if enough movies been made with this concept.
Dude, this is dark web.
It seems like it's becoming the new version of found footage films, but I do think this movie shows if you do it right, you can tell a pretty interesting story, and I think this movie does do that. One thing among many that puts this movie above something like Unfriended, aside from the fact that it's a good movie, is the fact that it utilizes technology in a pretty legitimate way. This movie never really feels phony, and it makes sense why it's taking place through the internet and the main character's computer. I think a strong suit of this movie is its lead character. The actor does a fantastic job portraying this dad who's very distraught over his missing daughter, and the way the events of this movie play out were pretty well done. I've heard some people say that this movie is kind of generic and kind of predictable. Aside from a few small moments in this movie, I would have to disagree. Maybe I'm just duped easily, I don't know. But I thought it was a very, very well done thriller. So a trend on this list you're going to see is a lot of horror movies, and that's because 2018 was a great year for horror. So the next one up is Suspiria. If you guys know, the original Suspiria is a giallo film. It's a very colorful Technicolor movie that's not quite like any other horror movie out there. It's pretty highly regarded as one of the greats. So when a remake was announced, I, like many others, was pretty hesitant about how it would turn out. That being said, the new Suspiria isn't really a remake. It kind of goes a different way completely, starting with the look of the movie. This movie's color palette is like a very toned down beige, brown, blue, and green look. It's a completely different take on Suspiria, and it has a completely different story too. I don't know why this movie's even classified as a remake, because it's completely different. This movie is taking place in 70s-esque Berlin, Germany, and it not only feels like it takes place in the 70s, but it looks like it's a 70s movie. It's shot very specifically to invoke that feeling, and man, it worked well. I will say, this movie is not for everyone. Not a lot of people are gonna love this. I was one of the people who did, but if you're squeamish and you don't like horror, I would stay away from this one because it's definitely like getting thrown into the deep end. There's a lot of set pieces that kind of make your stomach churn, thanks to the one, the great visuals, but two, the absolutely mind-blowing sound design. The fact that this movie didn't get any technical nods was kind of a crime, to be honest, because man, it's well done. It's got a fantastic score by Tom York, one of the best of the year, and just all the pieces just fit really well together to make this one heck of an experience. The only thing that's really holding this movie back is the fact that I think towards the end it kind of derails a little bit and gets a little too wild for me, and into the point where it doesn't feel like it molds so well together with the rest of the movie. But it's also a testament to how well done everything that came before it was, so I'm not going to knock the movie for the little aspect I didn't like, because it does so much right. So yeah, check out Suspiria. If you're into horror, I do think it is highly worth checking out. The Land of Steady Habits. Now this movie is great. It's a very well done character drama, which one already has brownie points for me because I love character dramas, and this is a very well done one. And not really talked about, honestly. I haven't heard many people discussing this movie, which is a shame because it's extremely well done. Ben Mendelsohn is a fantastic lead in this movie. He absolutely kills it. All the acting's great, but it's really his movie and he just knocks it out of the park. So this movie is about a man who decides to leave his family in order to find happiness, but he has some problems of his own. The main one being his alcoholism and not being a great father. And so it's yes, a dark movie and has a grim tone, but there's surprisingly a lot of moments of levity in here. There's some great comedy, and a lot of that comes out of, one, the writing, but two, the characters and and how the actors portray them. There's a lot of great line delivery here that kind of helps ease the overall dark tone of this movie. But yeah, I don't want to get into too much of this movie because it is kind of an experience, and with how accessible it is, I'm surprised not more people are talking about it. Ben Mendelsohn's a pretty big house name, so you'd think more people would have seen this by now, but I guess I'll recommend it here. Ben Mendelsohn's great. Go check out Land of Steady Habits. It's a great character drama, and it's on Netflix. Everyone and their dog has Netflix nowadays, so it's a pretty low risk watch. The next film on this list is the Vincent Van Gogh biopic, At Eternity's Gate. Now this movie, a lot like Mandy, which I know it's a weird one to compare, it's a weird thing to compare it to, but it's a very floaty, very dreamlike movie that kind of eases you through its story, and by the time it's over, you're like, wow, it's over. It just kind of glides by. It's a very, very easy watch, and that's not meant to be a negative. It just kind of works really well. It has a very specific tone, and it's carried marvelously by Willem Dafoe. I think without Dafoe's performance, this wouldn't be the same film. He really, really helps it work. Another thing is, if you're making a movie about Vincent Van Gogh, you'd better have some good visuals, and this movie really does. It has beautiful landscapes for one, but it shoots them really well. This movie kind of has a look that I wasn't really expecting because it's dealing with such a tortured soul. It has a lot of very claustrophobic shots that kind of invoke some anxiety, which I thought worked for the most part. There's a few instances where I don't think the cinematography always worked for me, but for the most part it was pretty well done and not quite like anything I've seen as of recent. So yeah, go see it for the performances. It's a well-told biopic, so check this one out for sure. It's a very artsy film, but very well done. Another Netflix film I saw last year was Roma. Man, Netflix has really been killing it with these originals in the past few years, and Roma, it's no exception. Alfonso Cuarón, he's a director that I've really been following kind of since I was a kid. He did the movie A Little Princess, which I grew up on with my siblings, and stuff like Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, which is the best Harry Potter movie. So yeah, he's done stuff like that, and of course later on in his career he did Children of Men, which I think is probably one of the best films of recent years. So when this movie came out, I was pretty excited. He's always been a very visual director, and man, I think Roma is one of his best in that aspect. It's such a simple, restrained story, especially off the heels of something like Gravity, which granted had great visuals, but I wasn't the biggest fan of. So it's nice to see Cuarón go back to a smaller, more toned down story, but still, he has such a grand scale in the way he shoots everything. Roma has a very palpable story, a really likable lead. I thought the actress who played her did a fantastic job, and I really just liked all the characters. This is a slice of life movie through and through. I will say, the movie, in the beginning, took me a while to get a hold of. I wasn't quite on board with it, and that's not to the movie's detriment. It's not like it was doing anything wrong. It was just a different type of pacing that I wasn't quite ready for when I watched it. However, when I went back a second time, I enjoyed it all the way through. It just took me a while to get into. I do think this movie is a very well-told story of 1970s Mexico, and it's just kind of another character piece. It just kind of follows the lead and just kind of lets you sit with her through these very big events in her life. If you start the movie, don't be turned off by its slower pace at the beginning. It will bring you into its narrative, and by the end you'll be an emotional wreck, because this movie is very emotional and has a lot of very profound moments that just kind of leave you in awe. So yeah, check out Roma. Again, it's on Netflix, so no reason not to watch it. And the next movie on this list is Boots Riley's Sorry to Bother You. Now, Boots Riley, he is a rapper turned director, and man, what a debut he had. This movie is something else. It's very bizarre, very unique. Not the movie I was expecting in a good way, but it takes some weird twists and turns. It almost feels like a disservice to get too much into this movie, so I'll try to keep it pretty brief. But it kind of reminds me of a modern take on a movie like John Carpenter's They Live, in the sense that it takes a satirical, political message and kind of weaves it into a fantastical story. This movie has some great acting, pretty much with all they all did a fantastic job. It's a funny movie, like I said. It always weaves through its tones very fluently. Sometimes it's shocking, sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it's pretty serious. So I would definitely give this movie a watch, because at least in the year of 2018, there's definitely nothing else like it. And we finally made it to a documentary, Three Identical Strangers. Now, chances are you've heard of this movie somewhere along the line, because it is a very shocking film. They reinforce in the beginning of the movie that this is a story that most people won't believe.
I wouldn't believe the story if someone else were telling it, but it's true, every word of it.
It's so shocking, so bizarre that it actually happened. And I'll get into it a little bit, but it is best experienced going in blind, so I'll keep this pretty short. The film follows three brothers who are long-lost brothers separated at birth, who come together in their college years and realize that they are identical twins that were all living separate lives and had no idea of the other's existence. So that setup in and of itself is pretty wild and crazy. They kind of built a history for themselves as the long-lost twins, but it gets even weirder from there. There's some mind-blowing stuff in this movie, and it's just it's a pretty traditional documentary in the way it's presented. There's nothing like visually striking about it, or its direction isn't like mind-blowingly profound or anything or groundbreaking, but the story itself is really where this movie's strength lies. There's scenes where information's being distributed, and it's just so shocking, so bizarre. That's all I can really say about it. Give this movie a watch. Go in blind like I did. It is a very, very interesting story. Speaking of shocking, Annihilation. This movie is a great sci-fi film. But unlike Three Identical Strangers, chances are you probably haven't heard much about this one, because it completely bombed at the box office, which was such a bummer to me. It's such a smart, well-done sci-fi, brought to you by the director from Ex Machina, which is another great sci-fi film. And this guy, he's great at telling these very fantastical, very visually immersive stories in the sci-fi genre. Natalie Portman and all the main actresses do a fantastic job carrying this movie, but I think its greatest strength is its themes of life, decay, evolution, death, and kind of resurrection, stuff like that. I know that sounds like I'm throwing out buzzwords, but that's the theme. Those are the themes of the movie.
Aren't these just buzzwords that dumb people use to sound important? Not that I'm accusing you of anything like that.
Basically, the rundown of the movie is a group of scientists have to go into this realm called the Shimmer. A completely mirrored look at our own world, where plants are growing in weird ways, and everyone who's gone into the Shimmer hasn't come back out, and so they send a very smart, skilled, and prepared group of researchers to kind of check it out. And then, of course, everything, goes down the drain.
Anything interesting in there?
No, it's been long abandoned, maybe even before.
A lot of crazy stuff happens in this movie, and something that surprised me quite a bit was it has quite a horror twist on it. There's some shocking stuff in this movie, and it has possibly one of the scariest things I've seen of all last year. People who've seen it know what I'm talking about, but I won't get into it because it comes out of nowhere and it scared me so bad. But really good, really well done acting, great direction, and it just pulls you into this world that blew my mind. Some of the visuals in this movie, I have no idea how they did. So if you're a fan of sci-fi, check it out, because this movie is one that definitely didn't get enough love. And now for another sci-fi that did not do well. It is The Endless by Benson and Moorhead. They are a directing duo, and man, this movie's great. So this is a bit of an interesting pick, and it's kind of a combo feature, because this movie is a companion piece to a movie that Benson and Moorhead had made previously in their career, I think back in 2012, a movie called Resolution, another great movie. And then they made a film called Spring later on, and I appreciated those films as well. I'd been a fan of Benson and Moorhead before The Endless came out. However, the only one you need to see before The Endless is Resolution, because the two films are a companion piece, and you really don't get the full measure unless you've seen both films. And man, does this movie make you appreciate Resolution more, and it really just... There's moments this movie just kind of blew my mind with some continuity and how they tied two stories into one. I don't want to get into specifics too much because it'll sound like the ramblings of a crazy man, but just believe me, the two movies work extremely well together. So the setup for this movie, essentially there's two brothers who they were abducted and put into a cult when they were very young, and they grew up there, and they were sheltered from all outside society, and so it kind of messed with their minds a little bit, but eventually they escape, and they've been gone for several years, and the older brother he's kind of come to terms with his new life, but the younger brother, he's still curious about the occult and what life was like there, and he wants to go back. And so it's just a quick, harmless visit, so they think, and it turns into something more, and which is where the wild stuff happens, which I won't even try to delve into here. But believe me when I say it's a fantastic movie, and it's on Netflix, so definitely check it out. Just make sure to see Resolution first, because otherwise you're just going to be lost. Up next is Spike Lee's Black Klansman. Now this movie I loved. I thought it was great. It's based on the real-life events of Ron Stallworth, who is the first black police officer in Colorado Springs, and his team, who are tasked with the mission of infiltrating the KKK from the inside, using Ron Stallworth as the middleman. Now that premise in and of itself is insane. It's a very intriguing premise, which of course is based off of actual events, which if you do see this movie, I'd highly recommend checking out some of the actual events it's based on, reading up on some of the interviews with the actual police department members, especially Ron Stallworth, because it's really fascinating stuff, and it makes a nice companion piece with the actual movie. But we are talking about the film here, so let me get back to that. This movie's great. It has a lot of great acting in it. I love the lead, a lot of the supporting actors, but I think the standout here was Adam Driver. He's given a lot of compelling scenes to work with here, and it was nice to see him get some Oscar nods for that. And it's also kind of cool because, fun fact, Adam Driver, he grew up in the same hometown I did, so yeah, it's kind of cool to see someone from there getting some recognition in the film industry, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, no, I think what this movie does best in a lot of ways is how it takes a very serious social issue, and it deals with it in a very poignant, beautiful way. just how delicately it handles its subject material. You get a lot of clashing ideologies and ideas of, can racism be tackled in this way? How do you stop it? Can, things be worked out from the inside? Stuff like that, which leads to a lot of very compelling, powerful scenes. So I thought that was beautifully done. And there's a good sense of tone here. Spike Lee kind of got some backlash for this movie when it was released because there is a bit of a comedic edge to this movie. People said that the reasoning they didn't like that was because it kind of took away from the severity of the issues presented in the film. And I disagree. I think the comedic moments were placed in the right moments. And one, it made it feel more human, because you need moments of levity like that sometimes, and the comedic moments were placed in the right areas. I never thought it was poking fun or lightening an issue. So yeah, check out BlacKkKlansman. I had a lot of fun with it, and it's a bit of a thinker piece too, so give it a watch. So the next movie is another documentary. This one is called Minding the Gap, and man, was I surprised by this. I went in completely blind. I knew the movie only by name. It was not the film I was expecting. I didn't know what to expect, but I was pleasantly surprised by this film. It follows the lives of a group of friends who were all raised in kind of rough environments, whether it be emotionally or financially. There's different levels to it, but they all share a friendship, and they all share a likeness of enjoying skating. Something I found very impressive with this movie was it has some really tough, challenging themes like ideas of like domestic abuse and like emotional strain, and kind of how like friendships can bond and transform over time, but they can also kind of evaporate over time. And so it handles those all very well without feeling forced or manufactured. You feel like you're getting a slice of life. What it does in capturing several years of these kids' lives is really cool, and just to see how that parallels to their adult lives. And a back-to-back documentary selection. I didn't realize I did that, but this next one is Free Solo. It is the National Geographic documentary about an insane man. No, he's not crazy, but what he does is crazy. His name is Alex, and he free solos, which I had no idea what that meant until I saw this movie. And essentially what it is you scale a mountain without a harness, without a rope, parachute, anything. You fall and you're done. That's it. And so that's our main character throughout this movie. And wow, I mean, if it sounds harrowing, it is. It's a very, very frightening film in the sense that you feel at any moment when you're examining this person climbing these ginormous, impressive rock walls, you really get that weight over it. And the people who surround him, you get their emotional strain of not wanting him to do it, but also wanting him to accept who he is and do what he loves. There's a lot of things at play here. This movie surprised me, much like Minding the Gap. And one, it introduced me to a culture I knew nothing about. Obviously rock climbing is something I'm aware of, but free soloing was something I hadn't really thought was a thing. It sounds just crazy to me, and to watch it play out on film, it's frightening. But man, do they capture some beautiful photography in this movie. National Geographic films in general are usually pretty well shot. They've kind of mastered the idea of shooting nature, but this one especially has such a grand scale. I'd say even just for the look of the movie alone, some of the shots in this movie are worth the price of admission, but what you get still is a really tightly edited, well-presented emotional story of a guy doing what he loves against all the odds. Now the main driving force of this movie is Alex's goal to climb the tallest natural wall, rock wall in the world, I believe, El Capitan. And it's crazy. It's a crazy goal that he set for himself, and so it acts as the main driving force of the movie. And the whole question is whether or not he can do it, whether or not he should do it. And I won't get into it because it's just better to see it play out in the film itself. I would definitely give this one a watch. I saw it again. I went and saw it in theaters, which if there's a chance to see this movie in theaters, if there's a special screening or something, do it, because it's so well shot and it deserves to be seen on a big screen. But if you can't do that, I know National Geographic screened it on TV. They aired it on television not too long ago, and that's how I saw it a second time. But whatever way you can see it, I think this movie's more than worth it. Docs and horror films. It's all about the documentaries and the horror films today. This next movie is Ghost Stories. So, this movie I was pretty floored by. I love horror, and this was a type of horror story that hasn't really been done quite the way this movie did it. It's a very, very well-made movie, and it kind of flew under a lot of people's radars, which is a bummer. I hope this movie gets more recognition throughout the years, because I was pretty surprised by it. So, it is a British-made horror film, and it is about a professor who is a skeptic, and he's set on a case by an ex-skeptic. And the man says there are 3 stories that I was unable to solve, 3 cases I was unable to solve surrounding the paranormal. If you can disprove them, then, you know, you'll be a valid skeptic. Maybe ghosts aren't real. And so that's kind of the setup for this movie, which I explained it very poorly. It's a lot more compelling in the film, but it's got a great setup. And essentially how this movie frames itself is that it uses the 3 stories, the 3 ghost stories, 1 as kind of a structure, but 2, they're all different types of stories that each have a different tone to them. So you're getting a very unique blend of different types of horror in this movie. The first story is more of a traditional horror tale. The second one is kind of it's a bit of a jump scare type horror movie, but it deals with like occult stuff, and it's kind of psychological. And then the third one is just a complete like character analysis that was really, really interesting. And so it was a cool blend of different types of horror that I really appreciated seeing. This movie was great. I think it was good throughout its runtime, but if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. By the third act, the ending scene especially, this movie becomes great. It makes you rethink everything you saw before it, and it kind of just ties everything up really, really well, and just kind of drops a bomb on what you thought about, 1, its protagonist, but 2, what the actual movie was about the whole time. I've seen this movie a few times now because I just can't get enough of it. I think it's great. I believe it's streaming on Hulu. I think that's where I saw it. But yeah, if you can, get your hands on it, especially if you like horror, because man, it's well done. And the funniest film of the year was Death of Stalin. This movie was great. I saw the trailer for it. I laughed so hard. I could not wait to see this movie, and it did not disappoint. This is a gut buster. I was laughing the whole way through. It takes the insanity, the paranoia of communist Russia at the time of Stalin being in office, and also the events, of course, the death of Stalin, what happens after that, and how the leading officials of Russia decide to handle that. And it's so funny watching these guys run around and trying to see who's the next leader, who's going to be Stalin's successor, how soon should they wait after Stalin's death. There's a lot of you see the power of Stalin still looming over long after he's dead, and that plays into a lot of the comedy of the movie.
He's irreplaceable. I must take his place. But you just said he's irreplaceable.
It's done factually, so it's not a parody at history, but it's just framing it as a comedy. And there's emotional moments in here too. It's got its dramatic elements, but make no mistake, this movie's a comedy. Perfectly casted. Jeffrey Tambor, Steve Buscemi are the standouts for me, at least, especially Buscemi. Watching those two interact on screen was fantastic.
Just swap with me.
I said no.
We can make it look like it's part of the ceremony.
What the fuck are you doing?
But there's a lot of good conflict in this movie too. As much fun as it is to watch this situation unfold, you do feel the weight of it. You feel how time sensitive everything is, and you just kind of put yourself in the character's shoes, and you're like, I would hate to be in that position they're in, and it makes for a really fun watch. Up next is Daniel Skiles' The Clove Hitch Killer. This movie, man, it ended up being one of my favorites of the year, and I wouldn't have even known about it if it wasn't for Red Letter Media on YouTube. They recommended it on their page, and I'm glad they did, because wow, it's such a masterful script, such a masterful, just his directing vision and how this movie looks, and the pacing of this movie, extremely well done. So, it's a ice-cold, very tightly woven thriller about a young boy who believes his dad could be an infamous serial killer called the Clove Hitch Killer, who has gone undiscovered for years. And that's where the drama of the movie comes from, and that's where the thrilling nature of the movie comes from. That's the base of it. I won't get into it too much, because being a thriller, there are things I could potentially spoil, and I don't want to do that. I'd maybe say check out the trailer, because it's a pretty well done trailer, but I say go in as blind as you can. And talk about powerhouse acting. I mean, Charlie Plummer, I had already been looking at him from All the Money in the World, Lean on Pete especially, which was another great film from last year. But also, I mean, this one, I think this is his standout. He's great. Dylan McDermott, he's great. He plays the father in this, and their dynamic, really, really powerful stuff. It's, man, watching those two perform, it's just like examining people, and because of that, it makes the situation all the more tense. I don't want to ramble on too much because I'm kind of gushing over the movie right now. I'll just say it's well worth the watch. And the final Netflix film is The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I think I liked this movie a lot more than most people did. I don't know why. I think everyone liked it, but I don't know. Something about this movie really stood out to me. Probably out of all these, one of the films I've seen the most from last year, because it's a very watchable movie. It's a Western that has 6 stories, so it's an anthology film in the Old West, and it kind of discusses some of the complicated issues on violence and morality that took place in the Old West, and it kind of uses that as a theme, but the greater theme of the movie, of course, is death. It was a great film. It was a lot of fun to watch, hilariously dark. I talked about it in another video I did, so if you want to see my full thoughts, check that out if you want, but I won't go too far into it here because I've kind of already expressed myself on it. But I will say, great movie, and again, it's on Netflix, so you might as well watch it. And the penultimate to this list is Yorgos Lanthimos' The Favourite, and I'm fairly certain I pronounced his name right, so let me know otherwise. This movie is extremely well done. It is a fascinating period piece. All the acting in this movie is great, and it follows a very unique love triangle / hierarchy dynamic with Rachel Weisz, Olivia Colman, and Emma Stone's characters. and kind of how those two go head to head for the queen's attention and how they can gain further access to the throne. It's really a hierarchy movie, and it's kind of those two characters doing whatever they can to keep the other one down, and keep their position of power. It's a fascinating movie. Darkly comic, very, very funny. This movie definitely isn't for everyone. I know a lot of people went into this thinking it was going to be your average period piece, but it's not really that. So go in expecting a bit of a twist on that type of film. But at the end of the day, it is beautifully shot, extremely well acted. I was super pleased to see Olivia Colman pull the Oscar for this one because it was well deserved. She's a great actress, and I think this is definitely her best role that I've at least seen her in. So, but yeah, no, the other actors are great, and I think what this movie has above all that really makes it work is its characters. Each character has such a unique, well-defined arc throughout this movie. Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz, I was especially interested, their characters, because just seeing them, kind of how your loyalties in this movie shift a lot, which is a hard thing to write, I imagine. But just making you care about one character in one instance, hating another, and then completely flipping your views on those characters. And I think it's kind of a film that's starting to cement Yorgos as a highly regarded director, which I think is well earned. He's got a lot of great movies under his belt. And if you're asking me, I'd say this one out of the ones I've seen is probably his best. So keep it up, Yorgos. Okay, final pick. The best movie of 2018, in my opinion, was, some of you might have guessed it already, Hereditary. I loved this movie. It was insanely well done. And to think it's Ari Aster's first directorial debut, it's inspiring, but it's also kind of intimidating that right out of the gates he came out with like this masterpiece of a film, extremely well executed. If you've seen anything about this movie, everyone talked about Toni Collette's performance. There was a lot of Oscar snubs that I was upset about, but above all, I think her not even getting a nod for lead actress was, man, that was a bummer, because this role, it is a powerhouse role. It's a true testament to her acting that in a horror movie with such shocking scenes, visuals, and ideas, that her performance is one of the scariest parts of the movie. That just shows how good of an actress she is, especially in this. It's, I think, her best role. I mean, Alex Wolff and the other actors, the other family members and co-stars, they do a fantastic job as well. But man, it's really Toni Collette's film. She shines really well in this movie. So, the horror elements. This movie has some of the best tension I've ever seen. It is a disturbing watch. It is so frightening. There's some scenes that really just turned my stomach. I saw this movie in theaters twice because I wanted to see it on the big screen twice, but I also wanted to show my friends the movie. I was like, you guys got to see it. They loved it. But something that I noticed was both times I went and saw the movie, there were people in key moments that were very shocking and disturbing. They were leaving the theater. And it's just kind of like, wow, like that's just how rough this some of the story elements of this movie are. So how hard it is to get through some of the elements, but it's just a testament to how well done the horror was. It's a great, great movie. And I just, above all, I think it shows what horror can be if treated completely serious and with, just full severity. And it just kind of shows the power of the genre, really. I mean, I've talked about a lot of horror in this video. We've had a great year for horror in 2018, but seeing a movie like this, it just really feels like there's a revival of the genre. I mean, it's no secret. People were comparing this movie to like a modern day Exorcist. I can see the parallels there. It's a very polarizing movie in the sense that people were on the fence about it. Like The Exorcist, but also very shocked. I mean, there's no denying that this movie it evoked a lot of emotion out of people, myself included. But yeah, no, that aside, you strip all the horror elements away, and you've still got a very solid drama. And I think that is a testament to the storytelling as well. There's a specific scene in this movie, and I know people know what I'm talking about if you've seen it. The theater was silent. You could hear a pin drop. There is some really shocking stuff in this movie. And as far as a story goes, I never knew where it was going. In a good way, it remained unexpected, had me on the edge of my seat. And it does a great thing with a twist at the end, in that if you go back and watch the movie, which I have several times, I think this is the one I've seen the most out of all the movies. This and Buster Scruggs I've watched a lot, but there's a lot of little nuggets of information and little subtle key details and imagery throughout the movie that kind of lead up to the final climax. And it's really well done storytelling. And again, blows my mind. This is Ari Aster's first movie, because wow, bravo, man. It's so good. I can't talk enough about this movie. Go see it for yourself. I mean, again, like any of the horror movies I've recommended today, it's not for the faint of heart. If you like the genre, you're probably going to get something out of this movie. But if you don't, there's some pretty emotionally harrowing stuff in this film that's gonna upset a lot of people. I mean, it is not an easy watch, but all in all, an excellent, well-executed movie. And I'm very excited to see Midsommar and see what else Ari Aster has to bring to the table. I mean, maybe this movie's a fluke, who knows? I'm hoping not. The trailer for that new movie looks great. Check that out too. But yeah, definitely give Hereditary a watch. Okay, I feel like I just unloaded a lot. 2018 was a fantastic year for movies. We got a lot of good films this year. It made this list no easy task. This video was hard to make. I was compiling the list for a while because there was a lot of stuff to sift through. There was so much good content that came out this year. But I hope you guys enjoyed getting my insight on some films that had a big impact on me that I really liked. Again, there's a lot of stuff I wanted to include in here that I couldn't. But this is more or less the movies that I really, really enjoyed. As always, I'm excited to see what the year of 2019 has to offer. Another year for movies, which is always an exciting thing. But yeah, so 2018's over, so I kind of capped this list off. I'm sure as I see more and more stuff from the year, my list will kind of alter and whatnot. But as it stands now, these are the movies that I think deserve some great praise for being just outstanding works of art. Anyways, guys, thank you for watching. More Nerd Theaters to come in the near future, and until next time, stay tuned, you guys.